Welcome to Theory Battle. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Dixon, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ben Tofel. Today on Theory Battles, we are looking at theories of mass communication. In particular, we are looking at the competing theories of mass media. Today, we are looking at the topic of social media, specifically Twitter, and which of the two competing theories is a better lens through which we should view Twitter and other social media platforms. I am going to be taking the liberal theory side, while Ben is going to be taking the critical theory or alternative view. Throughout the podcast, we are going to be making our cases why our theory is the better lens, and at the end, we will decide which theory we think makes the stronger case. Without further ado, let's begin. How you doing today, Ben?
I'm good, John. How you doing?
Oh, living life.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's get into this right away. Let's talk a little bit about the backgrounds of our two theories. Do you want to start with yours, or you want?
I can start. I can start this thing off. So my theory is critical theory, and where it came from was the Frankfurt School, where a group of scholars such as Marx Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Erich Fromm, and Herbert Marcuse, they're known for developing critical theory. Now, what is critical theory? Critical theory aims to reveal, critique, and challenge power structures and bring positive change to society. It seeks for underlying assumptions in social life that keep people from fully and truly understanding how our world works. To better understand critical theory, we can think of it like two groups being divided. Those who have power are at the top and those who don't are at the bottom. Essentially, the idea is that those who have power always oppress those who don't, even if that's not their intention or even if it's not malevolent. Critical theory uses race, gender identity, religion, disability, sexual orientation, and income as categories to better understand who are the people that do and don't have power. To go a little bit deeper into this, an important term to better understand critical theory and who has power is intersectionality. And intersectionality is used in order to seek and figure out someone's level of oppression based on how many of the groups I just mentioned they identify with. So, for example, if you have a disability, if you're low income, then according to intersectionality and critical theory, you're going to be more oppressed. So, as an example, the least oppressed person out of these three that I'm going to mention is the Black man, but then the more oppressed is the Black woman, and then the even more oppressed is a Black lesbian. So that's a little bit about critical theory and how it goes about finding who has power and who doesn't. So, John, I'm eager to hear what you have.
Yeah, so thanks. I took the liberal theory, which is obviously the competing theory to what you have. Liberal theory came before your theory. It relates to the social responsibility of the press. So it talks about media's role in like sharing the news and information, democracy, journalism, and it's kind of the exact opposite of yours, where this is talking about fairness and equality, while yours is talking about oppression. So
Mhm.
um, one of the big things for liberal theory is freedom of the press. One of the like subsets of liberal theory is libertarian theory as well, which is that social media is like an extension of an individual's rights to freedom. It kind of serves the people. It's kind of like independent voices that make the government responsible for the people. So it started out with philosophers like John Locke, David Hume, and John Stuart Mill. Through my research, one of the best ways I found to sort of explain how liberal theory came about was by an author called Stephen J. A. Ward, and he sort of described it in like the processes over time. So in the 17th century, he talks about the start of challenging authoritarianism through the printing press.
Mm,
or through the press just in general. And then in
mhm,
the 18th century, the creation of the fourth estate, which was like the public press. And then going into the 19th century is more of where the development of liberal theory comes from. Finally, in the 20th century, is the criticisms and growth of alternative views like your own that kind of expand or are alternate views of my theory.
mhm,
Um, yeah, so when it comes to the argument of using my theory as a lens to view social media in particular, I think there's really three main points to the argument. The first is that social media is open to everyone. It's a group of individuals that network and share information, which allows the liberal theory to give you a better view of what's going on. I think the second part of that is that freedom of expression is key to both social media and liberal theory. And we see this topic come up a lot with Elon Musk buying Twitter recently and talking about how the key to social media is that every side has a story, whether you agree with it or not. The third point my argument has is that the handling of misinformation kind of points out the key weaknesses of critical theory. So by handling misinformation properly, liberal theory is a little bit better of a lens to view social media. So that's kind of where my theory is coming from. What about you? What's your theory's lens that you would take?
Yeah, so the stance that I'm taking for critical theory is that it's superior to liberal theory. And if you're ready, I can get into the reasons why,
Yeah, go ahead.
if you're ready to move on to that, and then we can go from there. Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, okay, cool. So the first point would be to look at Edward Said's role in bringing to light the importance of critical theory. He was able to portray and paint the picture of how Western media, right, because this is a global issue, it's not just about Western society and who mostly uses Twitter, the predominant users of Twitter, but it's everybody. And so basically, Edward Said was saying how Western society painted pictures of people from the East, referring to them as barbarians, drug lords, snake charmers, and thieves. So this basically shows how the media can manipulate the public's subconscious mind and ultimately shape their perceptions, beliefs, and opinions in a harmful way. Because when we look at the world in general, we should be looking at, yes, doing what liberal theory is aiming to do, which is bring people together. However, how effective is it really when the people who are controlling the media and feeding the media are painting these type of pictures that Edward Said was able to bring to light and expose, just like how critical theory aims to do, is to expose these things that perhaps most of the public is unaware of or doesn't dig deep enough because they're too busy living their own life, right? They have other responsibilities, other things they need to invest their time in. So there becomes a big problem in that how can they think so critically? Anyways, we'll get more into that later. But to continue on my train of thought, I'll go on to the second point. We talked about Edward Said, but there's also Stuart Hall. And Stuart Hall was able to identify how in mass media, ideologies shape people's opinions, perspectives, and beliefs of those who consume the media. So, for example, Stuart Hall talked about media's racialization of crime or the patriarchal narratives on gender and the othering of immigrants and the poor. And so he's saying that for people who really want to better understand the world, we need to seek out different stories, perspectives, and views of reality, music, poems, books, and different forms of knowledge. And then the last point is Noam Chomsky, who believes that mass media produces content and narratives that are self-serving on behalf of the bourgeoisie, the people with the most power and who control the media. He shows how corporations and investors influence mass media outlets by using the large amounts of money they had, which in society today is a significant catalyst for power. And basically, they use that money that they built up to continue to push their own narrative onto the population through media. And it's usually not in the reader's or viewer's best interest. A quote from Noam Chomsky, one that really brings all of what I said to light in favor of critical theory, is that if you don't pay for the product, which for the most part, media is free today, then you are the product. And so critical theory, you have to look at media through a critical theory lens, because if you don't, you run into a big risk of following the advice of people who you may not even know who they are. You may not know their credibility. You just assume that they are credible because they got it on TV, but you may not know some of these points that I just mentioned, such as how the people who control the media and influence the media, like big companies, are painting a narrative in order to just be self-serving. So, John, I'm going to leave it at that. And I'd love to hear your points in support of liberal theory.
Yeah. So, yeah, the first point that I made is that social media is open to everyone, right? So, like coming from my theory, we first have to think about like what is social media? Well, one of the definitions or a way to describe social media would be a collection of websites or designed to enhance online communities for networking and sharing information. So the key to social media is all about sharing of information. But I think one of the key things about social media is that it's a two-way street. It's not, you can't view it as a one-way communication like traditional media was. So I think one of the points that you were making, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but was that it's all about shaping media. Well, when it's a two-way communication, it's a lot harder to shape that media in a way. For us in PR, we talk about how you can't really handle the media. The media kind of takes its own path. So I think that's one of the arguments that really gives to the liberal theory side. The second part that I was talking about earlier was that freedom of expression, which is key to both social media and liberal theory. We saw this on Twitter recently where accounts started getting banned because they were sharing false information or information that people didn't agree with. But now that Elon Musk has bought it, a lot of these places are coming back. And I think, especially through looking at it now, I think Twitter is maybe become more liberal. And you can see that in the way that a lot of these businesses are starting to leave Twitter. Everybody's like, there's obviously controversies around Elon Musk in general buying up Twitter, but I think that by seeing a lot of people together can make change in a way that is not necessarily for the businesses. And then finally, talking about that handling of misinformation, I'm going to go into one of my theorists here. His name is John Mills. So he was the writer of a book called On Liberty, and he introduces what he calls the harm principle. So the definition that he gives is the only purpose for which power can rightfully be exercised over a member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. And I think we're seeing this more and more in today's society, where I believe it's Iran, where people are banding together to take on those in power. And I think one of the key arguments to this is that John Mills doesn't actually say what harm is. He gives some ideas about what harm is, but he's not drawing that line in the sand. And I think that's for each person or each company like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whoever to underline for themselves where they think harm is coming from. And just to add to this, we see a lot about like content moderation policies, communicating these standards to people, which I think is the key point for liberal theory is that as long as everybody understands and these standards are communicated, I think liberal theory is the better lens to view it. So I think you can also see how companies are reacting to this harm principle, where they're seeing Twitter, especially, as a place where they can't control the narrative anymore. And it's a little bit scary to them. And a lot of them are backing out, but only time's really going to tell whether um, whether these companies backing out is really going to affect anything, because Twitter's not run by the companies, it's run by the people who are interacting. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So what I'm thinking, and maybe we can have maybe a back and forth discussion, we can kind of get into that now, where we kind of bounce off each other's ideas. But I would say that you talked about people banding together to work against those in power, right? What was the location you mentioned when you said that? Do you
Oh,
remember?
Iran with the
Iran.
I believe it's Iran with the headdresses and women not being able to leave the house by themselves.
Okay, and so now what do you think that is? Do you think that is liberal theory at work? Like those people came together because of the media was telling them, hey, let's go, fight for these headdresses? Or was that people taking a step back from the media and looking within to basically say that we don't like the way the people in power are trying to make us behave or what we have to wear? And so it seemed to me that they used critical theory in order to accomplish that.
Yeah, well, I think that, like, from my point of view, I
Mhm,
think that's obviously a good argument, and I think that um, from the liberal point of view is that the people gave them the power already, and they're able to take it away. It's not a us versus them. It's you you are one of us, so you can't control us sort of narrative.
okay, can you elaborate a little bit? So, it's
I mean, for me, like, the view of the liberal theory, it's that governments are responsible to the people.
mhm,
And it's obviously they're trying to control
mhm.
what's going on, but I don't think that's necessarily what's happening here. I think that by viewing it as people getting together and everybody being able, like, not obviously not everybody agrees with the people in power, and not everybody agrees with the people who are wanting to overthrow the people in power. And I think that, like, those who are agreeing with those in power aren't necessarily in that upper class themselves. And I think that's why liberal theory is a better lens to view it, because it views humanity as a collective rather than as two or multiple different caste systems, or however you want to describe it.
Right, brother. I completely understand. I also agree with you that we need to find that balance where we can come together as a collective and where we can be equal. But the problem and the importance of why we need to look at critical theory is because, well, how can we be sure that the governments are always doing the right thing? It's almost like putting total faith in the government, which are composed of people just like us. Sure, they've gone through maybe different forms of education, or maybe they have different experiences. They've gone through the process longer, but they're still vulnerable to making mistakes, um, missing information, because as you know, the higher you go up in the hierarchy, there becomes less and less people. And so I think it's definitely logical to say that as you go higher to the top, you lose perspective and you lose understanding of what it's like for the proletariat class and the struggles that they're facing and their desires. Uh, so, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I was just writing some notes here when you were talking earlier, and I think one of the things that your theory talks about a lot is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is shaping the media and influencing and pushing an agenda, right? That's kind of what your theory is all about.
No, not necessarily. Critical theory is about finding gaps and problems with how the media is trying to portray their message. And sometimes that message is not in favor of the proletariat, the working class. And so it's essential for people to look through that lens, because then they can start to think more independently and critically rather than just following what the main media will say. And I'll talk about this also, is that, you talked about Twitter and Elon Musk, right? So with Twitter, although it is a two-way street and it's a platform where a lot of the users are communicating with each other, we also have to consider two-step flow theory, so that the opinion leaders are basically leading and forming the opinions of most of the population. So we have to look at it through two-step flow theory as well. And we have to look at those opinion leaders. And sometimes those opinion leaders are people in government, or it's Elon Musk, for example. So critical theory still matters there too, because there's
Okay. Yeah,
always.
I definitely get where you're coming from, but I also think that it's self-serving not only on behalf of the upper classes, but also the lower classes. When you look at especially the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements of, it's not necessarily us versus them, it is a collective, right? And I think that the influence to push an agenda is, well, it's just kind of part of what advertising and media is, right? Or not media, but businesses is. And I think that especially when we look to like the liberalization of countries that have free speech, they're tending to um, trend more towards that liberal collective rather than those countries where free speech is opposed, where they're more us versus them, or two levels of people.
I see what you're saying. So you're saying that liberal theory is basically just about trying to have it completely even, right?
Yeah, I think liberal theory is all about um, news and information and democracy and journalism, and I think that that is what social media opens up. I think I'm sure people are trying to use it to control, but I don't think that like they're trying to use it that way, but I don't think that's the best way to view it, because I think everybody has the equal opportunity to share their part of the story, right? Like there's nothing saying that Elon Musk's opinion is any different than my opinion. It's just that more people agree with him than agree with me.
The problem here is that how are people agreeing? Because sometimes people are agreeing just based off of emotion, just based off of pathos, appeals of pathos. And the thing is that being able to think critically takes time, because it requires developing a broad understanding. That's why critical theory is important, because not everybody has the same understanding. And so that's where the discrepancy occurs. And that's why it's essential to use critical theory when using media. Maybe everybody doesn't think that, but definitely it's important for a lot of people, because they might be being influenced and persuaded and they don't even know it. They're not even really thinking for themselves. They're just following the opinions and beliefs of people who they admire, whoever that is, the opinion leaders, the government, the big businesses, the media.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we've both shown where we're coming from. I think we've both given a little bit of examples and evidence for our thesis statements. Um, we tried to apply a little bit of theory, and we critiqued each other's theories a little bit there for a while, which I think is definitely what we wanted to have done in this podcast. So after all this, how are you feeling about it? What are
uh,
you? What, do you still think that your theory is the better theory?
well, look, to tell you the truth, man, I took this stance because we have to take a stance. But I think after this discussion, um, both are needed, and perhaps the better lens is dependent on where you rank in society, because some people may need more of a critical theory lens in some circumstances, whereas other people may need a liberal theory lens. Depends on what their goals are and what they want.
Okay, yeah, like I think the same thing. I think it's interesting to view it from both lenses. I
Yeah,
definitely think that
one right here and
critical
one right here.
I definitely
Hold on.
think that critical theory, like after arguing it out, like or discussing it, I guess, not arguing, but um
Debating,
having our
civil
debate.
discourse.
Yeah, I think that your through my research, especially since liberal theory kind of advanced these other views like your theory, I definitely think that critical theory may not always be the best lens, but I think applying it in definitely in certain situations, like Twitter, for example, I think that viewing it in a, I think if the companies are leaving, and I think if it becomes a collective, I think that's where the liberal theory really comes through. But I think you're right. As of right now, it is about a two level or uh, difference in power, where critical theory is kind of right now the better lens.
So you're saying I won? I won the debate.
I will concede this one to you.
No, no,
So
no. I
I think
think
it's up to the audience really to decide that for themselves. I think that we both made strong arguments, and I think that from where we view it, there's advantages to both, right?
agree.
But the one that's arguably better is critical theory, and that's partially because it came out of the liberal theory view, right? Like it
Mhm,
came as an opposite view to that, right?
mhm.
So thank you, Ben, for joining me. I
Thanks, brother.
appreciate you being my co-host on this.
I appreciate
And
debating with you, discussing.
so that's it. We've decided that critical theory is the better lens in which to view Twitter through. But what do you think? Feel free to look at the resources and see if you can find a better argument for liberal theory. I'm John, and from both Ben and I, thank you and see you again on Theory Battle.